Yes, you guys, and welcome back for another news daily video. I'm NiniFC, this is Blue Lions TV, and for today's news daily video, I'll be focusing entirely on the Ben Chilwell reports linking us with a 60 million bid for the player this January. Now for today's video, I'm going to format things by talking about what his signing could mean for the left backs at the club right now. I'm talking about Alonso, Emerson, and even Ian Maatsen. I'll be talking about why Lampard would want the player in the first place. I'll be talking about whether Ben's worth it in the first place. And of course, I'm going to break down the latest reports surrounding us with the player. But before I can do that, do not forget to smash that like button. If you do like today's video, help me get over 2,000 likes. And on that note, we get into things, starting with the latest news surrounding us with the player. And this is brought to you guys by the Daily Mail. And they're suggesting that we're actually the front runners to sign Ben in the first place, beating competition from Man City. And from Man City's perspective, with Zinchenko and Mendy returning back to fitness, I guess a left back really isn't high on their priority list. But for us, it's a different story. The reports are suggesting that we want to make a £60 million bid for the player this January, and the player is seen as a key target. And yeah, he is a key target. He's on one of the high priority lists for players we're looking at. So there's a big reality that Ben could be playing for us in the not too distant future. But now that we know that we're interested in the player, what will his signing mean for the rest of our left backs? Now let's break things down, starting with Marcos Alonso. We understand that Marcus could potentially be leaving at the end of this window, so it would make sense why we would look at Ben in the first place, because ideally for a big club, you want two big players for each position. With Marcos Alonso, there's interest from Conte's Inter Milan, and there is a real possibility that he could sign for them in the not too distant future. So if Marcos Alonso does leave, this leaves a space available for Ben to fill. Now we move on to Emerson, and with Emerson, his future isn't so secure right now. Juventus have been eternally linked with the player. Reports came out earlier today suggesting that Juventus want to make a move for the player this January, so if that was the case, then it would make sense why we look to sign Ben as a replacement. But when you look into things deeper, the reason why Juventus want him is because they want a backup player for Alexandro. And if you're Emerson, when you're playing first team football, you're enjoying the club environment right now, you're playing in a system that gets the very best out of you as well, do you really want to go back to Italy to play second fiddle? I don't think so. And when the club have put a 2-year extension on the cards as well, everything's in Emerson's favour at this moment in time. And we need to admit that statistically, Emerson has been the best left back in the league until his current injuries. So I personally wouldn't see Ben replacing the player for the first team. Now to end things, we move on to Ian Maatsen, and let's not forget, Ian is only 17 years old, and now that Lampard is our new manager, it actually means that when a young player does get a loan move, it means that if he does impress, he has a real possibility of getting first team minutes. So it's not how it was back in the day where players would get these loan moves and still have no hope in hell in getting any minutes for the team. Lampard may think, listen, Ian, I think it's best for you to get consistent game time. By the time you're 21 years old, maybe you'll be re-evaluated. And let's consider that. By the time he's 21, that's going to be in 4 years. Now in football, a lot can happen within 4 years, but we need to understand that Lampard's here to win as well. He's not only here to fulfill his idealistic views on football and only use young players, Sometimes you need to rely on experienced players. Lampard may be thinking to the future. If I sign Ben to be my second choice or, fight for that first team spot, Ian will have his time in the future. If he develops well, Ian will have his time in the future as long as he works hard and impresses on loan. So to conclude, it's quite obvious that Ben is going to replace one of our left backs. I personally think it is going to be Marcos Alonso, meaning that Ben and Emerson would fight for that first team spot. Now, before we continue on with things, today's video is brought to you by the OneFootball app. Download the OneFootball app to stay up to date to all the latest news coming from across Europe surrounding this club. I use the app constantly every single time. Stories get updated every single second. It's quick, it's convenient. This really is a beneficial app to have. If you guys want this, you'll find it in the link in the description below. Now for this next segment, I'm going to break down and explain why Lampard would want to sign Ben for the team in the first place. Now as fans by now, we understand the importance that fullbacks play in Lampard's system. If we break down the stats and look at the performances of our fullbacks, we're a team now that like to build up our game down the flanks. And naturally, when you're doing that, it means that you need a technically accomplished style of fullback, and it means that you really want to strengthen those areas, knowing how physically and mentally intensive those roles are. And this is the main reason why big clubs are spending so much money in the fullback position. Now, I'll break this down very briefly and quickly. If you're a big team, you tend to hog possession and keep more of the ball. And if you're a smaller team playing against a big team, you tend to play without the ball. You tend to either park the bus or keep your team shape very compact in the central areas. Now, the reason why these teams use tactics like this is because they want the bigger teams to focus with the ball in the wide areas. By doing this, it means that you're further away. From their goal, meaning that there's less danger between the lines for them to face. And of course, the second reason is when you play with the ball out wide, your options become more limited. And that's because you have the touchline affecting the freedom of players. Of course, if you're in more central areas, it means that you have more passing options around him. You have 360 degrees of freedom. But if you're stuck to the flanks, that's reduced to 180. And of course, the role of the manager is to find a tactical setup to help you get an advantage against your opposition team. And this is where fullbacks come into play. Fullbacks for big teams need to be able to cover both boxes very quickly. They need to be very technically accomplished because sometimes they are going to be left by themselves and they can't be giving the ball away too easily. They need to help provide offensive threat by creating width with runs and behinds, and most importantly, help create those overloads in the wide areas. And teams want this. Big teams want this because if you create those overloads out wide, you tend to force the opposition team to have to leave their positions and come and close down the spaces. And that's how you manipulate the shape of the opposition team, by moving them from left to right, forwards, backwards, etc, etc. And as we're seeing with Man United, if you don't have fullbacks that can provide that threat in the final third, it means that your team becomes very stifled, very slow, no width, and you become very easy to defend against. So when you consider all the details that a top fullback needs to have, you really understand how intensive the role is and why big clubs today are spending so much money strengthening those positions. As an example, we saw Man City signing Cancelo for 60 million when they already have Kyle Walker playing as a right back. Now, maybe 10 years ago, that would be seen as a massive waste of money, but now because it's so important how you use the wide areas, big teams need to have two great fullbacks for each position. The fullback position has become ripe for constant rotation, as I'm constantly stressing. The fullback position is so demanding. If you mess up in the wide areas, you affect how the team perform, and this is why they constantly need to rotate. And because of that rotation, it means that the value for the fullback has gone up even more, because in today's game, you need to have 4 great fullbacks to really help out the team. As fans, we can see the realities. I mean, we've seen Emerson with an injury. As fans, we already know this. Emerson's currently out. Reece has another small knock. And even though our 2 current fullbacks have been performing quite well, I have to admit, they still don't technically really complement the system or the team, meaning that we can't fully play to our full potential. So this is the main reason why Frank Lampard would want to sign Ben Chilwell for the team. Now for this part, I want to talk about Ben and whether he would be a worthwhile signing for the team. But to do that, we need to assess the player and understand his strengths and his weaknesses. Now, I might sound a bit cynical, but when I look at Ben, I can't help but shake off comparisons with Wayne Bridge. Both players are fast, both players like getting forward as well, and both players could deal with aerial threats as well. I don't know you guys, I look at Ben and I respect the player he is. He's got a lot of very good qualities, but there are still some certain qualities in his game that have a lot of work to refine on. I'm talking about his defensive positioning, and yeah, he has improved in that regards, but I still think that it's not as good as it should be. I look at Ben's use of the ball, especially in the build-up phase, and when you look at the stats, he scores 10% less in pass success rate compared to Emerson, and even Azpilicueta and Marcos Alonso have a better passing success rate than Ben. And with those 2 players in particular, we know as fans that they tend to struggle in that particular part of the game. I think his defensive positioning could get better. He's a player that relies on his pace more, but I think that as he's maturing and getting older, he's understanding that he doesn't have to use his pace if he gets in the right position in the first place. But I have to say, the one reservation that I have surrounding the player is that I think he's a bit too one-dimensional, and that sense of being one-dimensional was something that Wayne Bridge had in his game. Now, Ben in the final third has been receiving quite a bit of criticism from Leicester City fans. They say that his final decision making in the final third isn't strong enough, he regularly picks the wrong option, and his key passes have reduced a lot. And it's no surprise why that's affected his key passes per game. Now, last season he played one more key pass than what he's doing this season, and I think the main reason why he struggles a bit in the final third is that he doesn't have too much imagination in his game. Sometimes in football, what separates great players from good players is how they improvise in difficult moments. Can you still maintain possession of the ball if you're getting closed down from all areas? Are you going to play the right cross or pass to our striker? I'm not too sure. And to be honest, to close with my final reservation surrounding the player, for me, whenever I see him playing against big teams, he doesn't really stand out or do too much. Now, there's some cons surrounding the player, but when it comes to pros, we know that he's very fast. He likes to get forward constantly. As I said before, he's very good at defending aerial balls, and he's the type of player that prefers to keep his position and slow down the opposition winger instead of really being proactive and running to close down the spaces. And because of that, one-on-one, Ben is very good defensively, and he has shown that if you need your fullback to act as an outlet for the switchboard, Ben is your guy. Now, that's my assessment of the player. That doesn't mean that I think he's bad. Of course not. I'm just giving my opinion very objectively. And to be objective, you need to analyze the pros and cons of a player. One massive pro that Ben has is that he's only 22 years old, and he's showing that he's a guy that learns very fast. And that's something that you're going to consider if you're a manager. So the current weaknesses that Ben does have might not be the case in 1 or 2 seasons time. And from that perspective, you could see why him and Emerson could be potential players fighting for that first team spot. I personally see Emerson as the better player, but even then, back in the day when we used to have Ashley Cole still needed to have a Wayne Bridge of his own, and this is how I can see Ben and Emerson acting together. And for the final segment, you might be thinking, Nini, don't you think that this Ben guy is a bit too pricey? Who would be your alternative if we never sign him in the first place? Now, as I said, I like Ben. He's a decent player, but I have to admit, I'm still quite indifferent on the player. That doesn't mean that I think he's awful. He definitely is not a bad player at all. He's got a lot of potential, but I'm just considering this, I'd hate to be in a situation where next summer we prioritize a lot of our time and resources, in particular, negotiating with Leicester City for Ben. And we know with Leicester, as I've said before, and as is well documented, one of the most difficult teams in this country to have to negotiate with. They make it extremely hard, they really drag things out, and I think that next summer is the summer where we need to execute. I want to see at least 2-3 big players being bought. One of those guys has to be Jadon Sancho, and I'm going to do a separate video on the player in the future, so you guys stay tuned for that. And for those reasons, and I know that it's a very contrived reason, but let's just bear with me. For those reasons, I think that a guy that plays for West Ham could be an alternative player over Ben, and his name is Missaku. And this is a player that's made great strides in a very short space of time. Statistically, so far this season, he's been outperforming Ben in every metric. He's a guy that's very skillful, very good in the final third. He provides that outlet we need. He can take people on by himself. Defensively, he's much better than he's given credit for. He comes back in position a lot. His concentration is also very good as well. And most importantly, I see this guy costing less than 50% of what Ben would cost us, especially when Ben isn't superior to Missaku at all. Missaku's 25, he's from London, he understands the league already, and most importantly, he has those technical attributes that we need for the fullbacks in Lampard's system. The guy is not inferior to Ben at all, and ideally, I like to see us sign him. But again, if we did sign Ben, I'm not going to be too fast. I still think the guy has a lot of promise, a lot of quality, and to be honest, it's not really a lose-lose situation when you have Missaku or Ben. But yeah, you guys, on that note, I'm going to wrap things up and keep things moving. In the comment section below, give me your thoughts and opinions on Ben. Do you think that we need to invest the vast amounts of money to sign him? Do you think that we should target alternatives instead? And if you do, please give me your reason, state the context, and please tell me why. I'm going to wrap things up and keep things moving. Thank you for watching, you guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm NiniFC. This is Blue Lions TV. See you guys later.